Hi, I'm Susan Stiles, and I have Christine Meyer, one of my colleagues here at Stiles Financial Services, and I asked her to have a little afternoon chat with me today. So this month's question in the Ask Susan column is, my fiance wants to combine financials. Am I being a bad partner if I don't say yes? And so, Christine, I asked you to join me to talk about this because you indeed just got married on April 28th of this past year.
I did.
You're coming up on a year pretty soon. And my guess is, because you're in the financial world, is maybe some of this issue was addressed with you and with your fiance at the time, and now your husband.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
When I ask this question, what's the very first thing you think of?
No, you're not a bad partner
Okay.
to not want to fully combine your finances.
Okay.
Because there's so many different factors in play, and everybody's situation is a little bit different. So in the case of our marriage, this is my second marriage and I have a daughter. So that made it a little more complicated, and we're both established in our careers. So, it's not like we're, young birds in our 20s getting married where we were just starting our lives entirely. We both had established things that we needed to discuss and navigate through.
Yeah, and you make a good point, because I'm actually seeing this question a little bit more often because people are waiting to get married later in life. And back in the day, people got married young. They stayed married forever. And oftentimes there was only one working partner. And so it was a little simpler then.
Yeah. Yep.
Today,
and usually one person handled the finances too. So.
That's right. Today it's a little more common. You've got the two careers. You sometimes have that late marriage start. You've got, in some cases, children coming to play from both sides or one side, and then sometimes you end up sharing children in the future. But I think where it gets complicated is where there's a large imbalance of either debt or assets. And so the question is, where do you think a couple should start?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing that each person has to do is individually figure out what their experiences with money, what their assets are, what their debt is, what their budget is, what's their relationship with money themselves. And then having those conversations together as a couple about how do you see money being used in your life? Are you like to enjoy spending your money? Do you want to be charitable with your money? What's your priority for saving for the future? What are your big goals? Are you going to be, having multiple homes? You're going to be using them as investments? Are you going to be funding college for kids and grandkids? Those are all really important conversations to have, and they're all big ones too. It's uncomfortable to talk about money. It really is. It's a really, really tough subject for people because there's a lot of insecurity around it and shame with it, and it really will test the communication of a relationship when you start getting into that.
Some people have debt, and that debt could be just from school. You get an education, it supports your career advancement, but you're paying a lot of money toward paying down that debt. And some people sometimes are embarrassed to share that. So you find someone that you'd like to spend the rest of your life with, get married, but you're afraid to broach that subject around things like debt. I've seen the opposite too, where an individual maybe has saved a fair amount of money and they are a little bit nervous about sharing their level of assets with their potential future partner.
And it's important to also understand what marital asset laws are in the states where you're going to reside as well. So, and that's part of that taking inventory piece. I know prenups they make people go, ooh, but really I think they're one of the best things you can do to start really taking inventory about what you have. Because it's not there it doesn't curse your relationship.
No.
If anything, it helps you work through your communication. And
And that prenups make a lot of sense if you have a substantial amount of money put away. If you're expecting a substantial inheritance, those would be if you own a business, okay, that you started before you even knew the individual you're going to marry. It's important that you have some type of a prenup. I think at least consult an advisor or consult an attorney about that and whether that makes sense. But the idea around combining assets, a lot of times we suggest here that monies that are premarital, that you keep them premarital.
Yeah.
And you don't commingle. Once you've commingled your assets with your partner, it's no longer premarital.
Right. Yep.
And then you were just commenting earlier about, because you work on the 401k side,
Yeah.
Christine.
Yeah,
So,
and even if you don't do a prenup and go through that whole, forensic accounting basically of everything that you have, it's important to hang on to documentation of what you had prior to your marriage, because we've unfortunately had calls from participants on this looking for information from, their 401k from 15 years ago before they got married.
yeah,
And those statements, they don't exist a lot of times
Yeah.
anymore, because if the plan changes providers, or that happens in other areas too, that data can get lost if you don't hang on to it. And
Right.
nobody thinks about that stuff at the beginning. You don't want to. You want to
Well,
get
no,
married.
right.
you want all the fun and the planning,
Yeah.
and it's like, ooh, yeah.
but the reality of it is 50% of marriages do
And
end up in
divorce.
divorce in the U.S. And so holding on to keeping your premarital assets separate, it's just a prudent thing to do,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, and I don't think it's any disrespect to your partner at all.
No.
Because you've worked for what you have, and they have as well. And I think a good partnership, you're going to understand that, and you're not
Right.
going to take it personally that they're not giving you everything. If they are, I would maybe
Yeah.
consider running, pausing on that marriage.
But in some cases, it may make sense to keep your assets separate. And maybe what we've seen is some of our clients will have a combined bucket that they both contribute to pay for the monthly expenses. But when it comes to things like large purchases, like let's say cars or toys and things like that, especially if the two individuals have completely different views on how to spend on those types of items, maybe it's better for those large purchases to be done separate.
Just
from
consult on the
communal
space
bucket.
it takes up in the house, I guess. But you can make your purchase on your own. But yeah, I know that when we were going through, and we recently sold homes and then bought a new home together, that we really went through and did a budget of everything that we expect to have, talked about where we want our money to go.
Right.
And then we do have that joint account where we put a proportionate amount of our pay into.
Right.
And then that goes towards those joint expenses.
Okay.
And, there's expenses for the child, and then there's vehicles, and then there's, you. And we just talk about whether or not that belongs in the joint bucket or not.
Well,
So.
Christine, I'm glad to hear that, given the fact that you work here at this firm.
Yes.
you at least
I practice what I preach.
That's good. I'm really glad to hear about that. But you know what is hard is you're in the business and the industry, but individuals that, sometimes they don't want to know about money.
Yeah.
They don't want to deal with finance. They don't want to deal with budgets. And this is hard.
It's really hard.
This is really, really hard. And in those types of situations, it's oftentimes good to kind of consult either an advisor, a psychologist, even your priest, your minister. If you have a parish that you're close to, they're actually well trained in marriage counseling.
Yes.
And even in the financial aspect of marriage counseling.
It's really about
And
communication at the end of the day.
Right.
Yeah. And then you do have to think about, too, thinking towards the future with those big goals that you have, but also protecting each other should something happen.
Right.
Because so many times we've seen this with our family members
Yes.
is one of the people passes away and the other
Yeah.
partner doesn't know what they have.
I
They don't know
know.
how to access it. They don't know how to pay the bills even
Yeah.
sometimes. Protecting from a monetary standpoint is important, but also the knowledge to continue on, even
Right.
in that incredibly difficult situation, right?
Yeah.
It just makes it that much harder if you're both not on the same page when it comes down to that.
And what about passwords?
Ooh. Get a password manager.
We've seen that.
Yes, yeah.
Where a spouse dies and the other spouse has no idea how to get into anything because it's all password protected and those passwords were not shared.
Right.
And if you don't have a password manager, they're not there
Either.
either.
The password managers, you can have your individuals and then you can have your joint passwords. We have that. And it's also, there's ways to set up failovers. So if you don't access your email for a set amount of time, you can have a backup that, so that, if something were to happen to us, I would then get access to my husband's email and vice versa. So we'd at least be able to get into the information that we don't have, but it takes a while. So
I think you hit the nail on the head, though. It's communication. It's really dialogue. And if you're going to marry somebody, you got to be comfortable in communicating about the stuff that's not really fun.
The icky stuff is not going to go away just because you don't talk about it.
Right. In fact, it's going to manifest and get worse.
Yeah. Yes.
And so I think the key really is open dialogue, communication, and then, the rules of a partnership get established early on in that relationship. And so understanding what the rules around whose responsibility is what and making sure that you're each comfortable with what your partnership contribution is supposed to be.
Your unwritten contract.
Right. It is the unwritten contract. You're right.
That mental load piece it's definitely in there. So, yeah.
And sometimes that's what happens. That's the reason why there's a breakdown.
Yes, absolutely.
Is because for some that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And then you start existing separately, but still together. And, and that's where
you don't want to be roommates.
No,
it's not ideal. And
no.
Unfortunately, that happens if you don't communicate and collaborate.
Right. So, any other thoughts that you have about?
I think we covered it pretty well, but at least for now, who knows what the future is going to look like for finances? But it'll always evolve, just like your relationship. So. But continue the conversation.
Communication and revisiting some of this stuff.
Yeah.
You get married, you start one way, and then maybe 5 years into it, you make some tweaks or some changes, or maybe just the financial makeup of your household changes too. And so you have to be on top of that and fluid enough to make adjustments as you go.
Yep, and we're about to find out it's coming up on tax time, so it's the first time we're going to file together, so...
Oh, that's right.
Yep.
It's that joint tax return.
Yes. Yep. And then having those conversations with the professionals that can give you the resources. So, yeah.
All right. Well, happy tax times,
happy
Christine.
Tax time. And happy almost anniversary.
That's right. That's right. And good luck to all the fiancés out there. And the key is, I think, to start with good open dialogue and communication.
Absolutely.
So, thanks for joining us on our Ask Susan column.
The Financial Flash is created by the experts at Stiles Financial Services, creating customized portfolios that fit your unique lifestyle and goals.